Welcome to this week's edition of Chatting the Pictures. In this segment, we're essentially asking the question, what makes a good news photo, or how do news photos tell a story? And here's this week's image.
This first photo was taken by Alyssa Andrews, and she was parked on the side of the road waiting on her daughter near the shooting when she saw an unidentified man in a green shirt and khakis covered in blood near the Virginia Beach Municipal Center on May 31, 2019. The photograph appeared on the cover of the newspaper there, The Pilot Online.
This is an incredible photograph, and it really raises the question for me of what makes a news photograph a news photograph? Does it need to be taken by a news photographer? And in this case, that is not what happened. But this is a photo that really implicates the viewer in the news story, doesn't it? In a way that we don't quite often see in the coverage of the mass shootings. What are we, the viewer, doing in this photograph? There's a kind of triangle. It's this man, this person who has clearly been involved as a victim. He's covered in blood. He's got this very, is he staring at us, or is he got a kind of traumatic stare? The 1,000-yard stare, so to speak. And then there's this police officer who is comforting him, but also looking over his shoulder. And so, to me, this photo puts me in a position to really not just question what is happening, but just the composition of this image is really inviting us to see these sort of incidents in a way that's a little bit more up close and different, I think, from the way we've seen them before. And so that dynamic of your interaction as the viewer with this man, it's like this kind of electric charge back and forth between my viewership and his face.
There was an article in the New Yorker this week, which was specifically about this photograph, and they were talking about if you could move a public opinion on the gun issue if viewers were seeing more blood. On the surface, I think you would say yes, but I think then you run into all kinds of different problems. Just like war photography, the media self-censors. Also, there's the question just from a practical standpoint in terms of access. Journalists don't always have access to carnage, even if it's something that they'd be more willing to show.
The next segment we call The Look. And here we're interested in how photographs push the visual boundaries to illuminate a story or an idea.
And this photograph was taken by Tim Rook. He shoots for Shutterstock now, and he's actually the royal photographer at Buckingham Palace. I don't have an actual caption for this because I pulled it off of Instagram, but it was marking the first day of the visit of President Trump and his entourage to England. We thought that this photograph actually encapsulates the trip as well as any photograph we saw from 3 days of thousands of them.
This is such great composition. I mean, just visually, you've got perfect balance, the contrasting vertical and horizontal, the different textures that are at play, the, rough stone of the balcony with the kind of filmy curtains that our two protagonists are peeking out from behind or drawing back. It's sort of hard to tell. These two figures are both highly visible and also incredibly enigmatic, and their facial expressions kind of tap into that. They're symmetrical with each other. They could be wax figures in a museum. The way their bodies are positioned, the way their gaze is just this kind of bland, forward-looking gaze.
Yeah, I think you could almost go with American Gothic in there also. What's really brilliant about this photograph is that most shots that you see of the first family is, they're either ironic or they're, very stagey. And this is that rare photograph that's really ambiguous, and it gives you the room to really make them objects and really draw your own conclusions. I also think that we rarely see candid photographs of anybody in the White House or anybody in the Trump family. And I had a conversation with somebody about that who thought that they had to have known that they were being photographed. I don't think so. I looked at a lot of shots, and I think this was like their first pass looking out the window, because then they put on their faces, and especially Javanka is very good at doing that. But, this has got that severe, cold, distant kind of sense to them. And I think it's also very, I think what it picks up to me anyway is, and especially in her, is that sense of calculation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Yeah, I don't know. This is one of those photographs where I look at it and I think, I want to know what happened right before and right after the shot was taken. Like I want to know where the photographer is standing to get access. How does this set up? Because it does really invite you to think about that. Like, do they know they're being photographed or not? Let's move on to our next segment, which we call the pick. And here's where we're really interested in the question of what makes a photograph a good editorial choice among lots of options, or what are some photos that get particular public traction?
This photo was taken by Philippe Boujazer for Reuters. The caption reads, "A member of the worldwide human rights movement poses in front of a mock tank on the Place de la République in Paris, June 4, 2019. And this is doing a lot of work, isn't it, Cara?
It really is. It really is. Most obviously, this is what I would call an image event, which is a staged spectacle designed to attract media attention. And because we're seeing photographs circulating in the news, we can say that it was quite a successful image event. We're talking about this image right now, for example. And then the staged quality of it, what I find really fascinating about it is if you think back to that iconic photo of so-called Tank Man, that anonymous man who remains anonymous today, as best I recall, who stood in front of and in fact climbed on top of and attempted to talk to tank drivers in Tiananmen Square 30 years ago this week in 1989. When you see that photograph, it's made from very far away and above. And so it really emphasizes a different scale than an image like this. And this image, because it's taken down at the level of the person, has a different kind of quality. And I don't know what to say about that, but it struck me as, we're more intimate with China now in the West. China has a much more integrated world engagement. And at the same time, a lot of the same anxieties and concerns that played out in terms of China's relationship to the world still exist, and maybe in some ways are even amplified. So this image event and this photograph of this image event really invites a lot of thinking about that moment in history.
It's really interesting how almost just the composition of this and the distances really do inform what's come over the last 30 years. I wasn't thinking about that, but your point's really interesting. The fact that this is sort of like selfie bait in a way, as much as it's a conscience photo and set up to draw the attention of the press and then to have the woman stand there. But then now it's like the focus is so much more on, and by the way, the gender aspect of this is kind of cool too. It's tank woman now. But the fact that the focus is really more on her, and over time, the photograph, the actual photograph, or the four that were or five, I think that were the most famous. They really emphasized some of them, just the state power and the number of tanks and the distance, the row all the way through town. And now this is kind of reframed to reflect how much it's all about that protester.
Yeah. So, the power, if you think about, that image and that moment, especially as it was captured on video on CNN, became so powerful because it was man against the machine, literally and figuratively in every way. And here again, you've got a kind of interesting play on gender, very gender neutral clothing, that same very forthright, literally upstanding body position, but again, with the shopping bags. So all of those iconic markers, but played out at a much more human scale.
Yeah. In fact, one other feature in there, and you said shopping bags. If you go back to the original photograph, no one's going to be identifying those as shopping bags. But then what's even more ironic is that you think about those bags. It looks like she probably just got done with a shopping spree, and she's got a bracelet on her arm. So it's tying to the totalitarian state, but it's also this thorough market economy. And it looks like those bags are kind of reflective of that. A shopping bag.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those, again, it's that image where, has China turned to consumerism, right, in the last 30 years? And the shopping bags cue that for us as much as anything else, right? So state capitalism becomes the word. That's a very complicated legacy of Tiananmen Square for sure.
Also, just formally, it looks like that's a photograph that's laid on the front of a 3D, like a physical tank. So it has the signage on it. But the fact that it has that kind of construction also is very I don't know, very modern and also also very strange.
Yeah, yeah. The take itself seems less threatening, even though it's pointed directly at us.
Yeah, it's kind of like cartoony in a way. So those are like three pretty different photos we had this week to look at, didn't we, Kara?
Yeah, we sure did. We sure did. But, the summer doesn't slow down, that's for sure. So we will see you all next time. Thanks for joining us.